Recently, I made a video talking about cut classes in Fire Emblem, and several people in the comments suggested I make a follow-up talking about cut characters as well. Since I am a man of the people, here we are. This is every cut character in Fire Emblem history. We begin in Arcania, as we do almost every week it starts to feel like, with the game that started it all, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. This game immediately has one very interesting character that didn't end up in the final game. An unused, playable unit that listens to the name Saber. Yes, he has the exact same name, all characters in his Japanese name are identical to Saber from the literal next game up, Gaiden. Whether these name-alikes were actually meant to be the same character is nearly impossible to say, but from what we can tell, that doesn't appear to be the case. Not too much is known about FE1 Saber. But left in the data are a portrait of him, which is identical to the one Michaelis uses, as well as growth rates, although he lacks base stats. For what it's worth, his growth rates are identical to Elise and Goto's, possibly suggesting they were merely a placeholder. Since we have no clue what his class would be, we also don't know whether those stats actually suit him. It is worth noting though that both Elise and Goto join in the late game and have growth rates to match. So perhaps this suggests Saber was another late game addition to your roster. A hint to another character is also left in the game's data. In a way, by far the most characters have been unearthed by the video game equivalent of archaeologists. A name. Just a name. No portrait, no stats, no classes, nothing. But we do know that once upon a time, a character named Wyler was supposed to appear in the original Fire Emblem. It isn't much, but you better get used to it, because there will be more games in the future where all we have to go off are names, unfortunately. But before we tackle those, I want to also bring up Mystery of the Emblem, which of course continues where Shadow Dragon picked up, but not everyone survived the jump to the sequel. Unused data for 6 units that never saw the light of day in Mystery of the Emblem, Rice, Roger, Goto, Jake, Daros and Beck still remains, however. But whether they were actually planned to be playable at one point, or whether this is just a leftover from Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, is impossible to say. Considering that Wyler actually returns as a cut character for Mystery of the Emblem as well, and the fact that every Shadow Dragon boss who doesn't appear in Book 1 of Mystery of the Emblem is still in the game's files, I would think this is a simple leftover from Shadow Dragon, which was used as a base for the sequel. But hey, those 6 characters, and I guess the bosses Heimler, Manu, Grygas, Benfion, Sternlin and Oridion as well, are technically cut characters, so I felt I had to mention it. We skip past both Gaiden and Genealogy of the Holy War, both of which have 0 cut characters we know of, and end up at the game with the largest collection of cut faces, Thracia 776. Several of those are reminiscent of what we saw in Mystery of the Emblem, seeing as they're characters from Genealogy of the Holy War who don't appear as units in Thracia 776 in the final game. However, unlike with Mystery of the Emblem, I don't think this is leftover data. After all, plenty of characters from FE4 don't appear in FE5, and yet only a selection of those is actually in the data, suggesting IS did have plans with these characters. Not to mention that several familiar faces only appear during cutscenes in Thracia, but have unit data remaining in the files. This applies to Travant, Julius, Ishtar, Arion and Manfroy. All do appear in the final game, but are never on the battlefield, and yet they all have a set of stats, classes and weapons ready for use. In Ishtar's case, there's even an unused weapon specifically for her, the Mjolnir Tome, and there is evidence that suggests she was supposed to be a reinforcement boss in Chapter 19, the Empire's Wrath, where the goal is to escape and retreat while the Empire counterattacks Leaf's forces. Several standard bosses fall in the category of truly unused though. All of them reuse portraits that did end up in the final game, but their names and stats are not the same as any enemy we encounter in the eventual title. You have the One-Eyed Jabal, Baron Sporl, General Mannheim, Wyvern Rider Orbis and Rilke and Kant, the latter two being named after famous German writers Rainer Maria Rilke and Immanuel Kant. By far the most interesting cut boss listens to the name Gunna, however. He uses the same portrait as Cohen, so looks like an old man, was supposed to be a bishop and actually has cut death quotes as well. And those are quite interesting. I quote, "I've lived long enough. Asbel. Combine this with the information we learn about Asbel's father through his ending, which states he used to be a priest in Rest, I think it's fair to assume this cut character was actually supposed to be Asbel's father. Why he ended up cut, no clue, but it is easily one of the most interesting omissions in Fire Emblem history if you ask me. We continue on to Alib, another hotbed of cut characters. Not so much in the Binding Blade, which has a grand total of 1. A cut boss by the name of William. His portrait is identical to Robert's from the final game, and he too is a paladin, but oddly enough, despite his level being higher than Robert's, his stats actually are significantly worse. So yeah, no clue what the reason for that might be, and I don't think we're ever likely to find out. But like I already kinda alluded to, the list of cut characters from the Blazing Blade is a lot more interesting. Unused battlefield data is found in the game for a decent selection of characters that are never actually on the battlefield at all. The most interesting in my opinion is Igreen from the Binding Blade, who never appears in-game but is mentioned here and there in passing as Hawkeye's daughter. While we can't rule out this is leftover data from the Binding Blade, the fact she's the only character still found in the code makes that unlikely in my opinion. Other characters that were at one point planned to engage in battles rather than exclusively in cutscenes like they are in the final game include Lila, Matthew's girlfriend and spy for Hector, Lord Uther, Hector's brother, Albert and Eleonora, Eliwood's parents, Brendan, founder of the Black Fang, who only ever appears as a morph in the final game but has data from before he was one, Bramamont, the mysterious legendary hero who even has an unused class, and a man named Igor, who is a member of the Black Fang and a lackey of Linus. 6 more unused names are found as well here, but who they might have belonged to we have no clue. These names are Nadine, Bruno, Bogan, Efta, Alexis and Badouin. If one of these is your name, congrats, you were almost a Fire Emblem character. Unless it's Bruno, then you still are in the end anyway. We also have a quartet of names only for the Sacred Stones to quickly mention. These are Demi, Maeve, Mulisha and Leu. But the real interesting pieces of information about this game are 2 full-on cut characters with classes and stats. Both appear to have originally been enemy characters, but ended up replaced as the game continued development. The first is Nate, a Wyvern Rider, who seemingly became the victim of the creation of Joshua. You see, originally Joshua didn't exist, and Cormac was actually a mercenary in his place. Nate was then presumably the Wyvern Rider that Cormac ended up becoming, with Joshua essentially replacing Nate in the final game as a potential playable character. One who was definitely aligned with the enemy, however, is Jude. In an early demo of the game, he is the boss of Chapter 8, It's a Trap, and has been tasked with capturing Erica. He introduces himself as Jude Rubert, and is one of the 7 generals of Grado. According to Seth, he is known as the Obsidian, which suggests he was actually supposed to be a character rather than a mere one-off boss. In the final game though, Jude is nowhere to be found. The boss of this chapter is now Torado, Valter's little helper, who's definitely not one of the 7 generals. His nickname, Obsidian, has also been passed on and now belongs to Dusel, possibly suggesting that Dusel is the general that didn't exist at the time of Jude's creation. But that is merely speculation on my part. We continue on to Path of Radiance, which is certainly an interesting one, because a lot of things that eventually ended up in Radiant Dawn are found unused in the code of Path of Radiance. For example, Sigrun and Nia Lucci have minor NPC roles in the first game but become playable in the sequel. And yet, data for them as playable units already exists in Path of Radiance, it's just never used. Lacane and Hetzel are both fought as enemies in Radiant Dawn after a similar minor NPC appearance in Path of Radiance, but for them too, enemy data existed as early as the first game. Zelgius never appears on the battlefield without his spoiler-sensitive armor, but data for that to happen does exist in both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Sanaki's older model that isn't used until Radiant Dawn also goes unused in Path of Radiance, which might suggest that at one time her older look was supposed to be implemented as early as the original game. And last but not least, we have 2 actual properly cut characters. The first listens to the insane name of Melty, which may sound like a pet, but actually is not a Legoose and instead an unused Pegasus Knight. Her code was eventually reused for Tanif's reinforced mechanic. A cut sword knight by the name of Hever was also supposed to appear in Path of Radiance, but eventually never did. The name, however, did live on and was used in Radiant Dawn for a new playable rogue. Next up, the Shadow Dragon remake. You may be wondering how a remake could ever have cut characters, and that's a fair point. But the thing is, there is actually evidence that this game was supposed to house the first truly playable Avatar character, which eventually ended up happening in New Mystery of the Emblem. A string of unused Japanese text suggests there was at one point a page to create a My Unit, so in a way, I guess you could say Chris was cut from the Shadow Dragon remake. Sure, it might not be much, but it's still more than what I have to tell you about Awakening. All we have to go off for this game are 3 names that went unused. Andrea, Leopold and Tracy were supposed to play some role in Awakening at one point in time, but we have no clue what that could have been. Fates doesn't have truly cut characters, but there is still some interesting stuff to talk about here. Several characters have unused blushing portraits left in the data, suggesting they were at one point supposed to play some role in your army, otherwise where would that be used? Some of these unused portraits belong to capturable bosses like Candice, Haitaka and Daniela, who can join your army but can never be brought into a position worth blushing over. Much more interesting though is the 6 characters that aren't usable whatsoever. Garon, Hans, Makoto, Iago, Zola and Omotsu. How these characters were ever supposed to be a part of your army, I have no clue. I mean, Makoto dies before the versions even start, Garon is never on your side to begin with, and Omotsu is a minor character who is the boss of chapter 3. The only reason I can think of is that once upon a time there was the plan to repeat what Awakening did and add these characters as spot pass or DLC options, similar to how that game added the already dead Emerin and the villain Walhart. There are also unused endings for Revelation which suggest that Yukimura, Gunther, Izana and yes, even Scarlet were supposed to appear in this version / survive to the end, which would have truly made Revelation the definitive version of Fates, from a completion perspective at least. Compared to this list, what Shadows of Valentia ended up cutting seems like minor stuff, but I actually think it's really interesting. Cut voice lines exist for both Vernant and Berkut that suggest they were at one point supposed to be able to level up, eat, retreat and mourn post-battle, i.e. they were supposed to be playable. That has some massive story implications, so this must have been quite early stuff, especially Berkut does not exactly have an easy way back into your army. Now, it should be noted that Vernant is playable in 2 DLC maps, but here he can't level up or mourn anyone, so this is definitely not the purpose of these voice lines. And then we have 3 houses, which may have a ridiculous number of cut content overall, but in terms of cut characters, it isn't necessarily the most shocking, I'd say. Rhea, Sophis and Gerald were all at one point supposed to be playable, as critical cut-ins, unused voice lines and stats suggest. Gerald and Rhea could also be invited for tea parties, which in Rhea's case eventually was promoted from unused to used, as an update became available to allow you to invite her to a drink during a quest. Count Galatea, Ingrid's father, exists in the data of the game as a character, albeit one without portraits or any information to speak of. And technically, he isn't even unused. In Byleth and Ingrid's B support, Ingrid reads a letter from her father and the contents of this letter are scripted to come from this unused character. So yeah, I guess he isn't technically unused. Who is unused though is a mysterious extra DLC character. So when Anna and Juritsa were added to the game via update 1.1.0, every character that appears in the Cindered Shadows DLC was also preliminary added. And among those was an unused character who is said to be a commoner, a 17-year-old girl born on January 1st with the exact same stat spread and growth rates as Ferdinand, and at one point did have voice clips, but these have been removed by the time the update released. So yeah, perhaps the Ashen Wolves were at one point supposed to be 1 extra woman strong. And last and, well, not least, but it's not the most exciting, we have Engage. Queen Eve, mother of Alfred and Celine, and King Morion, watching father of Diamant and Alchrist, both have nearly complete dialogue for battle, suggesting they were at one point meant to appear on the battlefield, if not playable. Also interesting is that several characters have voice clips meant to be used when they defeat an opponent, which are never used in the final game. These include the 4 hounds, both regular and possessed Lumera, Hyacinth, possessed Hortensia, Veil, Pastelier and Sombron. Not sure if this really counts as cut characters, but it is possible that somewhere along the way these quotes were meant to be used when these characters were playable. I'll admit, them being used when they defeat one of your units is probably more likely, but hey, we can't rule it out. And these have been all cut characters in Fire Emblem history. Which did you wish weren't cut? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.